Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, that's G-R-A-N, group, at edinarealty.com, or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners.
On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-game series against the Washington Nationals. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. After dropping 6 straight games to the Yankees and the Guardians, the Twins come back swinging, Dan. My goodness, doesn't it feel good to be back in the win column?
Sure does. This was a beatable team, as we saw in Games 2 and Games 3. And when the Twins are actually hitting, then it seems like, oh yeah, this is a great baseball team. When they score nothing, it's very easy to hate on them. When they score 10, it looks like everybody's rocking.
It definitely feels like they're a different team, Dan, than the Guardians and the Yankees. Like, those series felt very much like last year's team, and this series felt like this year's team. And I don't understand, like, is it really just the level of competition? And part of this is, I'm biased. I just don't think Cleveland is that good. But maybe I'm wrong, Dan. Maybe they are that good.
I mean, Cleveland is, I think, tied for the best record in the AL. They're 33-17, tied with the Yankees. So maybe it is just the way that the schedule has been, where they just happen to have these really good teams clumped, and then the bad teams are clumped too. So we'll see. Maybe it all shakes out in the wash here. We did want to mention a couple things. So we didn't mention the Timberwolves game last episode because we were recording beforehand, and I don't know about you, David, but I didn't want to jinx them. I didn't want to say something or I didn't want to alienate. I didn't know the mood of the audience, I suppose. But we were recording this after game 1, and so that was a game that could have won. We're not ball guys. I get that. We're baseball guys, not basketball guys, but still.
Yeah, I've said it with each child that we had, I have to drop a sport, and basketball was the first one to go. So like I was a ball guy probably late junior high through high school. Like I really followed the Wolves closely. But yeah, this is the most basketball I've watched. I mean, outside of March Madness, this is the most basketball I've watched in probably 15 years. And so what's so funny to me about this though, is since we don't watch a lot of basketball in the house, like my daughter and my wife are both kind of confused about why basketball is on the TV. And this will prove, Dan, how much basketball we watch, because my wife says, do you have to win by 2?
I mean, there are some versions of basketball, street basketball, right, where you have to win by 2, but no, not at the Target Center.
But anyway, yes, we are following the Wolves, but no, we are definitely not a Wolves podcast. And like, I always feel when my wife does ask me questions, I'm like, well, this is kind of what I think. Like, I have a basic understanding of basketball and like even to some of the intricacies, but not like baseball, right? So like, she's asking me questions. I'm like, I don't really know. She's like, was that a good play? I'm like, they scored. Sure. Yeah, it was a great play.
Anyway, well, we should go back to our wheelhouse, David, which is baseball. Let's go in here to the series recap.
Series recap.
Game 1, Dan, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and you had said that you just decided to lump this game in with the previous 2 series?
Yeah, that's going to show up throughout here. The Twins lose this 12-3. Now, the Twins do actually take a lead in this one. They score once in the top of the second to take a 1-0 lead. It could have been bigger, though, but a strange play, and I can't tell whether I'm supposed to blame Tommy Watkins or blame Byron Buxton, because Byron Buxton got thrown out at home by, 87 feet? Is that about how far he was from home plate?
Like, I don't understand. He started running home when the shortstop had the ball. Everybody was confused what was happening. And so, yeah, the question is, do we blame Tommy Watkins? And I would argue, of course, we should blame Tommy Watkins.
Obviously, every time.
But I think in this moment, I really blame him. I understand that there's not a great camera angle that shows Tommy Watkins, whether he's got his hands up or he's windmilling. You don't really see what he's doing. However, if you watch the replay, there is a camera angle that shows Buxton as he touches third, and he stops, and then he starts to run. And to me, Buxton wasn't looking at where the ball was. The only reason that would cause Byron Buxton to break for home is if Tommy Watkins is telling him to go, and we know Tommy Watkins wants to send guys, even if there's players who have died on the field. He's wanting to send them home regardless. He screams at Buck, you get home, doesn't matter how many players are dead.
Hold on. Saucedo, the Mariners pitcher, that's what you're referring to, was down in a pile. He wasn't necessarily dying.
I'm not dead.
He just had a hurt ankle or something like that when he sent Max Kepler. But yes, the moral choices of Tommy Watkins have been much discussed here as well on this podcast. Well, the Nationals, in any case, they score 2 runs in the bottom of the second, and then they're kind of off to the races. They score another one in the fourth. They score 4 more in the fifth. So it's 7-1. And then a curious thing happens on the TV broadcast where Corey Provis and Paul Molitor, and I think it was Denard Span, who was also on the broadcast this series, we're talking about Mitchell Parker, who's a lefty, and he was the starter for the Nationals. And David, I looked at his splits, and it's remarkably reverse.
Now they've got it backward. Tell them to turn it around.
Against righties, batting average is 225. Against lefties, it's 317, right? And so this is a lineup full, of course, of righties here because reflexively Rocco does this. And they talked about how like Rocco and Tingler were talking before the game and they, quote, look at the pitcher's, quote, whole body of work. What other body of work are you looking at? This is the season. This is what matters. And sure enough, this is during a Correa at bat. And then he bombs a home run as a righty off a lefty. And I thought, gosh darn it, ruined my whole argument.
Did you go back further than this season? I guess that's my question. Are they saying that historically he hasn't always had reverse splits? It's just this season?
He's always had them. I did go back and look. They're just more pronounced this season. And admittedly, he's a younger guy with, not a lot of, well, ironically, his body of work is quite small. But anyway, I was frustrated that you know how like you're building an argument in your head and you're kind of looking for evidence to add on. And like in my heart in that moment, I was like, dang it, Correa just hit a 2-run home run. That ruins my whole thing.
Confirmation bias, Dan. That's what you were looking for. And you got contradiction bias is what you just got hit with, Dan.
Anyway, doesn't matter because the Nationals score 3 more in the 6th. They had 2 in the 8th. And then, of course, we have a Caleb Bushley sighting late in this game here after Pablo Lopez was really ineffective.
This was a rough outing for Pablo. He goes 5 innings pitched, 7 earned runs, 5 strikeouts, but 2 homers. He just didn't look right. And this season, he hasn't been the shutdown guy. I went back and looked through his game logs. He's had a lot of good starts, Dan, but every now and again, you see the 4 innings or 5 innings pitched and multiple earned runs. And that's not what you like to see out of the guy who's supposed to be your ace.
No, and so let's hope that he does turn this around. One other thing I wanted to talk about was in the bottom of the 6th, some Little League ball was being played by the Twins, and I've seen a lot of Little League baseball. So this is the situation. Eddie Rosario hits an RBI single, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later. And then Christian Vasquez throws behind the runner at third here. Miranda can't catch it, so the ball bounds into left field. And I don't know where Willie Castro was. Was Willie Castro out of the warning track? It took him forever to get to this ball. He tries to throw home. It's offline. And so Rosario has come all the way around from first base to score on this in like the most Rosario-esque play that ever there was.
If there's anything that makes me sad about this podcast, Dan, it's that we never developed a sounder for Eddie Rosario. I mean, we had a pretty short window to do so, but what would it be? There's so many options, Dan.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brain.
Just like every time he tries to advance a couple extra bases on balls that are right next to him. Sure.
Oh my gosh. Well, so anyway, all this to say, this loss precipitated a players-only meeting. And do you remember last year, David? I had to look it up. The exact date was June 28th. So this is more than a month earlier. But after that Atlanta sweep last season, when the Twins looked terrible and Joe Ryan gave up like 6 home runs, the Twins looked pretty good after that. So here's to hoping they've clicked that first domino in the line. And so it begins here, David.
Do you think there were sausages involved in the players-only meeting? Like, do you think they like brought a whole bunch of different sausages out and they had each player taste them? And they're like, this is going to be the new sausage?
I guess we'll never know. I mean, it's a players-only meeting. They sent Correa out to talk about it afterwards, and then that was it. But they bounced back. It officially worked, David.
I think time will tell, Dan. I don't think winning 2 games against the Nationals means it worked, but maybe. Moving on to game 2, like you said, it must have worked. I guess you're right. Confirmation bias abounds here on the podcast. Twins win this one 10-0, all because of a players-only meeting, which basically was wine tasting and sausage tasting, Dan.
But it was 10-0. I mean, this was like a beatdown. It was a great game from Joe Ryan. He gives them 7 innings. He gives up only 3 hits, 2 walks, 6 strikeouts. Griffin Jacks comes in, he strikes out the side. Stalmont comes in and pitches a pretty clean inning as well. Again, only 3 hits on the road, and you score 10 runs. Like, this is a Rosario resounding win. A lot of good things happened, right? So in the top of the first, Carlos Correa triples on a ball that Eddie Rosario dove for oddly. I don't know why he was diving for this.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains.
So that was weird. This was a series full of great plays by Correa. He had a wonderful diving play behind second in the bottom of the second. Do you think he was lined up illegally?
No, I don't think so, but they kept showing the replay, and like where he was positioned, I was like just so nervous that he had screwed up again and they were going to challenge the call. But no, he made sure his left foot was on the left side of second base, so we were all okay.
It gets better because Jose Miranda hits a 2-run home run, and on the radio cast, they pointed out that this is above the zone, and he has hit those high pitches well, and that's what he was doing as a rookie, and not so much last year when he was kind of dealing with the shoulder injury. But that was an excellent sign to see him hit another home rome, just a bomb to left.
It was so satisfying to watch the contact because he knew it right away. And at first, I thought he was going to showboat a little bit. Like the way he moved the bat, it kind of looked like he was going to flip it, but it was a no-doubter. And it was high out of the zone. It was 2 inches north of the zone, Dan. It was great, like you said, to see him hit that one so deep.
I am not throwing away my shot.
We will talk more about Byron Buxton a little bit later. He hit 2 home runs in this game, which early on gave the Twins the 6-0 lead. Twins get a couple more in the top of the 6th on an RBI double by Santana, who later scored on a wild pitch. And then in the top of the 7th, Willie Castro gets in on it, hits a 2-run home run to make it 10-0. When I see that replay, it looked like a fan helped him out a little bit and kind of reaching over the side of the wall to make that catch.
They showed the replay a few different angles, and it does sort of look that way. But I think, honestly, 8-0, 10-0, what's the difference, Dan? Let's just go home. I do want to point out, Dan, I mentioned Kyle Farmer was due for some more playing time, and here he is, Dan, getting a hit, great play in the field, and he stole a base.
He's turning it around, and when you look at that lineup, I mean, the under 200 batting average still looks pretty bad, but he is coming up with some big clutch hits.
Moving on to Game 3, Dan, probably the most exciting one to watch from a baseball perspective. Like, Game 2 is the one you want to watch as a Twins fan. Like, they get things back on track, they're scoring a ton of runs, but Game 3 is the game you want to watch to, like, feel that feeling when you're watching sports, where you're like, what's going to happen? You don't know what's going to happen next. It's a really close game. Twins come away with this one 3-2, but my goodness, I never felt comfortable with this game, Dan.
No, and the Nationals actually had a Minnesotan on the mound, Irvin, who gave him 6 1/3, 5 hits, 2 runs, 6 strikeouts, 2 costly home runs. Always fun to see a Minnesotan on the other side of things. He was matched up against SWR, who had a pretty good start. He goes 4 2/3. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, too. 3 hits, 1 walk, 1 strikeout, and then it's a bullpen fest where 5 guys get in as the Twins are able to lock this down. They get just enough offense.
Yes, just enough, Dan. There were some plays, though, to be mentioned here. Bottom first, Dan, Jeffers catches Winker trying to steal second, and here's what I'll say. Julian put the tag on Winker, and he got him. It was fine. It was a very good play. But one thing that Correa does so much better than almost everybody else in baseball is he lets the ball travel to his glove before he gets the tag down. And Julian, I saw it in the Yankee series when I was there live. Soto was going to second, and they could have had him, but Julian, grabbed the ball 4 feet in front of him, and then he, leaped back to try and tag Soto. It was the same thing in this throwout. He caught the ball way too early. You have to trust your catcher's throw is going to be on the money if you're going to have a chance to get the guy anyway. And if Winker was even a split second faster, they don't make that because Julian doesn't let the ball come to his glove.
It's just another one of those little things that Correa does really well. Twins are able to get ahead in the top of the 2nd. Max Kepler gets a fastball and doesn't miss, hits a solo home run. And then in the top of the 9th, Kepler's there for an insurance run. He hits a double. Jeffers, who's been on a bit of a schneid, has an RBI single, and that proved really important because the bottom of the 9th got dicey.
Yeah, Joey Manassas hits a home run. Luis Garcia Jr. singles, and then Duran gets the next 3 outs. But Dan, we're not going to talk too much about Duran the rest of the episode, but are you a little bit nervous that he just can't seem to get his pitch mix right, and his locations have been a bit suspect? He's still got the heater when he throws it, Dan, but so often that heater's middle, and it's really concerning to me.
Well, that's because that's what the coaches are telling him to do, David. We will come back to that when we get to Rocco's Rewind. But yeah, all in all, this is a good series win for the Twins, and I think we can go on to a segment you're going to be very happy about, David.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
So we didn't mention the other way that the Twins scored in Game 3. It was a Correa home run, and that is what put you over the top here, David, with 14 points. I had 9 with Buxton. Kepler had 7 for the listeners, and Hogs had Miranda with 6. I mean, all guys who hit home runs, but David, I got to give you credit here for picking Correa once more.
I was pretty surprised I came away with the victory after the way that Buxton performed in Game 2. And I told you before the podcast, and I'll say it again now, Dan, so you have the receipts. Buxton had a chance here. He got called out on strikes in an at-bat today where it was the dumbest thing. So it was a 3-1 count. A ball comes in, and it's maybe borderline on the inside of the plate, but they call it a ball. So then 3-2 count. Here comes the pitch. It's in the exact same spot, but even a little bit further inside, Dan, and they ring him up. And it's like, what are you doing? You can't do that to a player. It's unfair to be that inconsistent, especially if that first pitch, the batter is now told, hey, this is a ball, even though we all know this is probably a strike. It's a ball. And then a worse pitch comes in and you ring him up on it. Like, that has to be the most frustrating thing as a batter.
Absolutely. And luckily it didn't cost the Twins either of those games. But we look at the season standings here. Kufus, you also got the bonus half point because Correa had the most on the team here. So now you're up to 8.5 points. Hogs is in second with 4.5. I'm at 3.5. The listeners stuck at 2. What's gotten into you with these picks?
Sometimes you guys let guys fall to me that you shouldn't have. Like the second Kepler I got to take after he had just gone off when he came back from the IL. I don't know what you guys were thinking there. And then same with Correa. But to be fair, the Correa win against the Yankees, he only scored 2 points. So I don't know how much you can be blamed for that.
Well, in any case, good on you. But there's a long season left. Let's go on here to our next segment.
Beast versus Bench.
Losing fun? Is losing fun.
Well, as is tradition, Dan, I have to go with Carlos Correa. I think that Byron Buxton would have been a good choice here as well. But Correa won me Puckett's picks. He goes 3 for 11 with 3 RBI. But really, his defensive play in this series, Dan, was absolutely vital, especially the game-saving play in Game 3. I just think that he, as a shortstop, Dan, just doesn't get enough credit for the way that he leads this defense. And honestly, he has a rocket where his arm should be, Dan. It never ceases to amaze me to watch that guy sling it to first base.
I want to build a championship culture.
He's certainly doing everything that he said he would do last season, but didn't because of that plantar fasciitis. So he has been really fantastic for this team. I went with a pitcher, shocker, but I went with Joe Ryan's big start in Game 2, coming off the players-only meeting to give them 7 shutout innings there. You know, I know that the Twins scored 10 runs, but man, it really puts a beat down in. He looks excellent. He's been their most consistent starter, 3.15 ERA now, and I know he's only got 3 wins, but he's looking like their best starter.
You know, Hogs at the beginning of the season made a prediction that he was going to regress quite a bit, and I was never on board with that train because a guy who can locate the way that he does, I mean, again, what was amazing about Game 2, Dan, is that he didn't give up a homer. I mean, that's like the essential signature. If you had someone who was trying to verify by a box score who the starting pitcher was, nobody's going to say Joe Ryan in this outing because there's no home runs given up.
No, and it seems like it's been other guys, like your guy, Pablo Lopez.
Yeah, Lopez is going to be on my bench here. He only goes 5 innings pitched against 7 earned runs, 5 strikeouts. What bothers me about Lopez here, Dan, is he gave up 3 runs against the Yankees, but he got through 6. I don't really care, right? It's the Yankees. It's a very good lineup. 6 innings, if you only give up 3 runs, that's a good outing for a starting pitcher against that lineup. This is not the Yankees, Dan. This lineup has Joey Gallo and Eddie Rosario in it. Like, that's not the same as the Yankees, Dan. You shouldn't allow 7 earned runs, Pablo.
No, just looking at the batting averages on this team right now, this is from Game 3, but it's, 1, 2, 3 guys, 4 guys under 200, a bunch more in the low 200s. Yeah, this is not murderer's row by any stretch of the imagination.
Who's on your bench, Dan?
So I actually went with an old friend, Joey Gallo.
Don't worry, be happy.
And he was 1 for 10 with 6 strikeouts. How is he still in the lineup? Did the Nationals miss the memo?
Please attempt to be a gentleman.
Like, what's going on in this front office? He played in every game. He played almost the entirety of every game, too. His batting average is 126 with an OPS of 556. Like, what is this guy doing in the majors still? He's had so many chances, and he's flamed out now with 3 or 4 different teams. Like, what did the Nationals think they were getting?
I don't know, but they're paying him more than they're paying Eddie Rosario, Dan.
I mean, it's just nuts. So thank you, Nationals, I guess, for letting him not. I mean, the last time he played for the Twins was August of the last season, even though he was on the roster through September. So I'm glad he's getting paid. Again, nice guy, great teammates. But he stranded 6 guys in a very winnable game here, struck out against Duran in a key spot in the bottom of the 9th. Yeah.
If you want further evidence, the enigma that is Joey Gallo playing at the major league level, go take a look at his batting average through his career. Through his 10-year career, Dan, he has a batting average of .195, Dan. It doesn't even start with a 2.
Well, I'm just glad he's playing for the Nationals and not for the Twins. Let's go on here to Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
You know, last year, Dan, the team turned it around after the players-only meeting when they started to say, we should listen less to the coaches and talk more amongst ourselves. Do you think that's sort of similar? Like, is Rocco upset about that? That that's the same approach they're going to take this season? Like, let's listen to the coaches less and talk about the game more to ourselves.
Well, and that's what's funny. So Michael Rand wrote an article for Randball in the Star Tribune. It was middle of this series. I think it was after game 1. And he talks about how he's got some quotes from Duran in here. And this is about Sunday's game that they lost. And Duran is saying of his pitch selection that led to the walk-off home run for the Guardians. He says, "It's not my decision. I thought that he wasn't good with fastballs. I am an employee here, so whatever I need to throw, I need to throw it." I mean, the damage control was immediate, right? Rocco says, "I think he's just frustrated and was looking for a way to vent. I thought it was unusual. I wasn't expecting it. I like to handle our stuff here with a conversation in the clubhouse." Yeah. That's a concerning quote when your closer doesn't feel like he can make the pitch that he wants to make and he has to throw the pitch that he's told. Like, what is Pete Mackey doing here?
I don't know. Like, Rocco even said, like, the time for that conversation is on the mound, like when you're debating what pitch to throw. And I guess the question is, what happened in that exchange? Did Duran actually say, "I want to throw fastballs"? And Mackey was like, "Nah, man, you're going to throw off speed into the guy's wheelhouse." Like, even if Mackey said throw a curveball, he didn't say throw a curveball like middle in on a guy who's going to turn on it and hit it 400 feet. Like, no, that's not what Mackey said. Speaking of Mackey, they kept showing these replays from game 2 because he was wearing one of these sweatshirts that had like the zipper down the front, and the players kept playing with it every time he came to the mound. Correa would zip it up or zip it down because they felt that he needed to chill out or he looked too chill. It was pretty funny.
I think the players are taking over this team right now, David. That's what it seems like. They're not listening to the coaches. They're messing with their wardrobe. And we should congratulate Rocco, too, for his 400th win during the season as a manager. So congratulations. I mean, what would happen? We'd have to rename this segment if they got a different manager, David.
We're pretty good with alliteration, Dan. I'm sure we could come up with something. I mean, we had Gardy's gripe, right? We were ready to go. Except for I think that would be Gardy's gripes because we'd be complaining about Gardy. You know, I've actually been thinking about this, Dan. Both in appearance and in sort of opinion and vernacular, I would say that you're sort of like Rocco and I'm sort of like Gardy. So we got, folks, if you want, you can text the show. There's a link in the description. You click it and you can just send us a message. We don't get your phone number or anything. But somebody sent a message and said that my views, Dan, were outdated, which is just rude, Dan. But it made me think, there's probably some truth to that. I'm more like Gardy, and you're more like Rocco. And I'll just live with that fact.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brain.
I want to see Rocco and Gardy go at it physically. Put them...
A battle of wits there with the wine back and forth here.
It wouldn't be wine, though. It'd be like bubble gum, right? And like one of the bubble gums is poison, but they're actually both poison,
Rocco's been working up in an immunity. I think he would be the one to survive, I think, in this situation.
The analytics said you should be eating bubble gums that contain a little bit more arsenic each day.
Iocane powder, David. Iocane powder.
Is that real? I don't even know.
It's not a real thing. I'm pretty sure it's made up, but it sounds really good. Anyway,
it sounds fancy.
You have something to say here to Rocco as well.
Yeah, but I don't know how to justify it. Like earlier when you were trying to find confirmation bias between reverse splits, like you're trying to find the rationale for that. Game 3, bottom 5, okay, you pulled out SWR, which is sort of funny because he was 1 out away. There's nobody on base from getting a win, potentially. And you bring in Okert. And Dan, I don't like that. First of all, you have a whole bunch of guys who are fresh in the pen. Like, bring in, I guess, Thielbar even, or Funderburk is probably the best option. Of course, after today, maybe I don't think that any longer. I just don't want to see a guy throwing garbage sliders up there in a 1-run game, especially when you took out a guy who could have gotten a win. It was 1 out with nobody on base. You don't think you can give him an opportunity, at least, Dan?
Well, the funny thing is he's only thrown 77 pitches. Like, he's not overly tired. Like, let the guy pitch. And the irony, of course, is that Okert gets the win, pitching 1 1/3 innings. Yeah, that was a strange choice.
Well, and we do need to mention, the Nationals have a cart that brings the relievers to the field. I don't know how far away their bullpen is, Dan. Like, I mean, are they sitting at the Capitol and they got to like shuttle them over from the Capitol to get to the stadium? But Okert tipped the driver, which was pretty hilarious. So that kind of made the rounds all over social media.
See, nice guy. Well, hey, let's move on here to our Minnesota moment.
Minnesota moment.
Game 2, top 5, Dan. I got to go with Buxton's 2-homer game. It was just great to see him sort of back in action and offensively just on it. So He had one in the second and one in the fifth. The first one was hit to right field, Dan, and the second one was hit to right center. But Buxton is typically a pull hitter when it comes to home runs. So both of these were kind of surprising. I don't know if he got a little boost from the wind or if he just really was making good contact, but it was great to see a guy go oppo for 2 home runs, especially when most of his home runs are towering shots to left.
Yeah, and he had a couple in game 3, some pitches that he was just off of, some fastballs that it looked like he was about to crank that just kind of went straight back. My moment is in game 3, bottom 7th, and you talked about this a little bit earlier. So Funderburk gets into a jam. He gets second and third with nobody out. He is able to get 1 out. Jax comes in, does allow a run, but gets an out on it. And then Correa makes a huge play up in the middle to dive. I thought this ball was going through, but Correa is able to snag it. And I love watching him throw a baseball across the diamond like that, because that preserved what was a 2-1 lead at that point, and that really proved to be the difference. What would have been a very different game if he doesn't make that play.
Probably a loss, Dan, if we're honest with ourselves.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's Musings.
So we were just talking about Buxton, Dan, and I think I did this. I don't really think that you and Hogs do this, but do you think that we collectively, the royal we in this instance, Dan,
right,
do you think we undervalued Buxton's offensive upside when he was on the IL because of how poor the center field play was when he was gone?
I think we undervalued it because he wasn't very good in April offensively. And so last April, we've talked about this before, he was the AL player of the month in 2023. So yeah, I think we did undervalue it when he is healthy and playing well, because he can be a difference maker. I also liked him in the 6th spot today. I just thought that kind of took a little bit of the pressure off of him. And because he's never, I don't know, like, do you remember the early years when Paul Molitor had him up like batting 3rd or something right out of the gates?
They had him batting leadoff from time to time too.
Yeah, and I just think he's a guy who kind of thrives on low expectations, if that makes sense. You know, he's had so many heavy expectations put on him for so long.
You were the chosen one!
That if the pressure's off, I think he performs a little bit better.
Well, and Molitor, though, too, he was managing teams with a very old school perspective about getting speed guys on base and trying to knock them around a little bit. And I mean, what's so funny is probably the worst base running years. I mean, outside of the time that Eddie Rosario and Rocco Baldelli were on the same team, was Paul Molitor leading this team, Dan.
That's true. That's a good point. I have a different question that kind of looks forward. So we saw good news out of the minor leagues where Wally Jenkins and Brooks Lee came back to playing games again after kind of dealing with some injuries. My question for you, and because Brooks Lee has been so marred this season by injuries, when and if do you think we'll see him in the majors this season?
I think the only way we see him is if Correa goes down with injury, because I think Miranda has shown himself to be very capable at third base, and he can swing the bat. Brooks Lee, I don't think they're going to put him at first base. I think between Julian and Farmer, unless the Twins do something drastic at second base, sending Julian down or cutting bait with Farmer, I think the only way that Brooks Lee gets to the major league level this season, unless the Twins are totally out of it come September, obviously during September call-ups, I think the only way he gets called up is if Carlos Correa goes down with injury.
Yeah, I think you make a good point actually about the September call-ups. I think he's the guy at that point, provided he's been healthy, and so maybe he can contribute then, which, this is a side note, but Royce Lewis is close to returning. But the quote by Paparesta, the Twins trainer, was one of my favorites. This poor guy is probably asked every time availability is there, you know, what's the status of Royce? And this is what he says. He says, quote, "We're getting close to a point with him, I think, where we start heading in the right direction of a rehab assignment, but we're not ready to say yet when." If that's there's like 5 qualifiers in that statement. I don't even know what to make of that. It could be August for all we know.
Royce is currently on the moon, but you know, he might get back sometime. It'll be great. Yeah, let's look forward to his return.
All right, well, let's go on here to a tricky one, series grades.
Series grades.
Dan, I'm going to give him a B, because even if you take game 1 out of the equation, which I know is what you like to do, they went 3 for 15 with runners in scoring position. Now, granted, they still scored 10 runs in game 2, but 3 for 15 with runners in scoring position, Dan, isn't going to get it done.
Yeah, I don't care. So I'm grading this based on the fact that game 1 was actually part of the Guardians series. You know, it hung over into Monday. It was the strangest thing. And so I'm giving them an advanced retreat score of 9 out of 10 because they won a series on the road, and I think that that's great. They got back on track. We'll see. Now they might win 8 in a row, you know, for all we know, the way that this team plays. And then, so as far as pitching goes, again, game 1 didn't happen. They only gave up, 2 runs in the whole series, David? 5 out of 5. Batting, they scored 13 runs. That's a 5 out of 5. So I've combined fielding and base running into one number now because I thought, I can't leave out base running, and where does that fit? So that got a 5 out of 5 too, because the crazy shenanigans of game 1 didn't happen. That's a 24 out of 25. That is a solid A.
You can't Dan, this is wrong in so many ways. First of all, you can't just ignore a game that took place in the series. Secondly, you can't keep qualifying your required fields that are graded, Dan, by adding more and more to them. If you want to split them out, honestly, what would make me so happy, make it a 100-point scale, a round number, Dan. It doesn't need to be 26 points. It doesn't need to be out of 26. Make it 100, and then do as many categories as you want. I don't even care at this point, but I can't keep doing this, Dan, each episode where you're adding qualifiers. Oh, now it's not just fielding, it's also base running. No, Dan, make up your mind. I couldn't even tell you what your first draft was at the beginning of the season that I was so upset about. I know I hated it. I absolutely hated your first grading. And you've changed it, and I liked it for like 3 episodes before you decided, you know what, I'm going to make this just a little bit more complex. Just a little bit more complex. You're the teacher, Dan, who takes the syllabus and each year adds just a little bit more, not realizing that you have a new group of students who are coming in. They didn't all live through your first syllabus, Dan. Only you lived through your first syllabus. So we have listeners coming in here, and they're like, what?
There it goes.
And that was Gardy's gripe.
All right, I think you've said enough there. That got personal there a little bit, talking about my teaching, I tell you. There we go.
Oh, man.
Anyway.
Okay. Onward, Dan. Herbie's headline.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
So, I don't know why this struck me as funny, but Corey Seager hit a home run, and the video is pretty good. So, I think he's hitting a ball to right. They're playing against the Phillies, and it's in the 8th inning. It's an important game. And there's a little girl, I think, who's trying to make the catch of the home run ball. And then there's another woman who's trying to make the catch with her nachos. And she's the one that makes the catch, but the nachos are struck by the baseball. They go flying everywhere onto the field. The poor outfielder Nick Castellanos picks up this nachoed baseball and throws it back in, only to have a review decide that it was indeed a home run. But this was the strangest thing, and I felt really bad for the little girl who nearly made a catch, but the ball was taken from her by this nacho woman. Do you know what they call a baseball in that situation?
Nacho baseball.
Nacho baseball.
Oh, Dan, it's terrible. It's not even. Oh, man. We don't have a bad pun button. We need to have a bad pun button, Dan, because that was terrible.
Anyway, one other thing I wanted to mention. The Pirates' O'Neill Cruz, his 2 last names, hit 2 baseballs over 120 miles an hour in the same game. That's hard to fathom, a baseball traveling that fast. There's one that he hits down the right field line. It touches the wall before the camera can even get there. Incredible. The Twins do play the Pirates obviously this year, but it's on the road. It's coming up in just a couple weeks. So we will get our chance to see that. Hopefully he doesn't hit them that hard against the Twins.
Well, it depends who's on the mound, Dan, I think is really the question. But I have a couple of notes here, just really quick. We need to recognize that I realize that the Twins in the standings are currently 6.5 back from Cleveland, but both Cleveland and Kansas City are on 6-game winning streaks, Dan. And I would love to tell you that those are going to stop, but they go up against the Rays and against the Angels. So that's not great, Dan, for the Twins' chances here to catch up in the next couple of series here.
Here, we got the Rangers series to look forward to after a Twins day off. Let's go ahead and make our picks.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's picks.
So the listeners are going to take Correa, then it goes to Host, who takes Buxton, and then it goes to you, Dan.
I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to take Trevor Larnach.
Oh.
And the reason is that Dan Hayes tweeted that Trevor Larnach hit the baseball very hard this series. And so I think it's only a matter of time before he's able to find some space and get back on track. He was raking early in the year. He's been quiet lately, but I think he's got Rocco's trust. I think he's going to get back on track in this series.
He only gets at bats, Dan, against righties in weird situations, it seems. It just seems like he's not getting a lot of at-bats. I'm going to take Kepler because I think that Kepler, well, he's the guy who's left, Dan, who I want to pick. It's really the reason I'm taking Max Kepler.
Yeah, you do. He's your guy. I get it. We'll see. You think they can win this series against the Rangers?
I mean, they're 2 games under 500 currently, Dan. So they're not the team that we thought they were going to be before the season. So I think that they certainly can take it. I mean, the Mariners are up on them by 3 games, Dan. So you would think if the Twins took 3 or 4 from the Mariners, if I understand the transitive property, which I'm sure I don't, the Twins should be able to beat the Rangers.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brain.
We need a couple new sounders, folks. If you have ideas for the sounders, feel free to send us a text. Also, we'd love to mix it up a little bit so Dan can get off the same 3 that he continually uses.
I didn't use the ogres are like onions any time this episode, so I don't use the metaphor.
Are like onions.
All right.
Just for you, Dan.
All right. How about you go ahead and send us out?
Will do. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Men for the Win and find our Men for the Win Facebook page. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins.
That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kuvas and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.